Thank you all for being here and for joining us and talking about navigating legal minds and regulatory challenges. Should be a really interesting conversation. We're really lucky. We have 3 terrific representatives from companies in highly regulated areas to talk about both the joys and, of course, the challenges of building their business in such regulated areas. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. So 3 of the most regulated areas, we have representatives in insurance, healthcare, and mortgages. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to please introduce themselves and at a very high level talk about both their business models and the problem that their company is solving for all of us. We'll start with you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Mike Serbinis. I'm the founder and CEO of League. We're a digital health benefits provider. And essentially what we do is we completely reimagine the health insurance and health benefits space for employers, making an all-digital product that gives you a completely personalized experience, and for your companies, makes every dollar that you spend on healthcare go further.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hani Elias. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Procured Health, a Chicago-based health tech company. And what we do is we help hospitals deliver value-maximizing care to patients by helping doctors and hospital administrators make evidence-based decisions involving what medical devices they use, when to use them, what drugs to use, when to use those drugs. So we really infuse evidence into the decision-making process in an area of healthcare that for a long time has really been primarily driven by sales reps driving the process rather than good data.
Hi, everybody. My name is Val Saportas, and first of all, thank you very much for having me here. So I am the CEO and co-founder of Mortgage Hippo. We're a Chicago-based startup, just a few blocks from here, actually. So we have taken on the very easy task of digitizing the entire residential mortgage experience. So, hopefully I have some people in the audience who have gone through the residential mortgage process and understand why this is important. So to that end of digitizing the entire mortgage experience, we have built what I like to describe as the most consumer-centric digital mortgage platform in the industry. So it basically walks the consumer through every part of the mortgage process from the very early stages when, as a borrower, you're thinking about what kind of loan programs you qualify for. Should I have a co-borrower? How much do I qualify? How much down payment should I be putting down? To the later stages, once you've already selected a loan and said, okay, I want to get a 30-year fixed, what do I need to do to actually get it? So, providing all of your supporting documents, bank statements, tax returns, pay stubs, everything that you need to do to actually go through the mortgage process. So making it very easy for consumers to really go through that process and understand what they're doing, and also facilitating the collaboration between the lender on one hand and really the borrower on the other. So that's what we do. Our business model is we actually take this platform and we offer it to all sorts of different lenders, whether it's an independent mortgage banker or a bank or a credit union. We take this platform and we offer it to them as a white label solution, right? So the end user, the borrower, doesn't even know anything about Mortgage Hippo. It's always that lender's brand in front of them. So we offer it to them as on a monthly license basis, basically. And we have some top national lenders. We have some smaller mortgage brokers. So that's what we do.
So, Sal, I love how you were talking about how, from the user's end, your companies and your platform makes life so much easier. But behind the scenes, these are very complicated, complex businesses that need to deal with extremely sophisticated regulations, where I'm sure you're all using counsel on many levels, which we'll talk about in a minute. But just so that we're all sort of understanding what you guys have to deal with behind the scenes, can you talk about the specific regulations that you each have to deal with in your businesses, both at a very high level, how these regulations impact building your business, and also on a day-to-day basis, how these regulations impact your work as you're growing the business each day?
So in our business, we're in healthcare. We sell insurance, and based on building our own experience and our own product, we move a lot of money around, millions of dollars, eventually millions per day. But right now, around that per day. So we have to deal with healthcare legislation, not only at the federal level, but at the state level. So obviously the Affordable Care Act and what's going on with that right now in the Senate. We've got to deal with HIPAA because we move health information around. We have to deal with insurance regulation, again, at the state level, so the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. And we have to deal with actual financial regulation that specifically dictates what we do with the money that we hold in trust and how we move it around. Of all the companies I've had the pleasure of building across different categories, different sectors, I've never spent more money on legal and advisory fees. It is
Good use of money, too.
Off the charts. It's highly valuable, highly valuable advice. But just to give you an idea, typical seed round, and we did a 4 million US seed and then a 25 million USA. Typical seed round is probably half that. In our seed round, of that 4 million, we spent $1 million on legal and advisory fees. The last 6 months alone, I've spent at least that, hiring some of the best firms that specialize in healthcare and insurance in the country. Because we're right now in Canada and the US, and we're rolling out across the US, and we're looking at other countries for the beginning of 2018, we have to do this at every state level, province in Canada, region or county in the UK, and at the country level. And the thing is, if you don't spend the money, and if you don't get the advice, and you think you are just going to bust it all up, you run into trouble. And it's always better to invest up front in a lot of these situations. So that's what we're doing.
That's terrific. So when you started your business, you obviously knew you were getting into an area that was heavily regulated, and I'm sure you did lots of research and knew what you were getting into. But have there been any surprises on the regulatory front that you weren't expecting?
So in my case, I actually didn't know. I started the business. I just sold my last company. I happened to be in LA. I heard about the future of medicine from this renowned physician, and I thought, that's interesting. Future of medicine, very Star Trek-like. Awesome, I can't wait. But for me, my experience, whether it was living in the Valley or living back in Canada, with my health insurance has always sucked. And as a business owner, it's always gotten more expensive. So what I want to do is I want to change the experience for the consumer and just make it better, empower people with their health. What I didn't realize is how you can have the same regulation and effectively have 12 or 50 different turns at it, and have to engage local firms, local law firms, and every one of those 50 states, or at least the 10 that matter, and do so on every one of these specific regulations, which, it's a lot. The complexity's off the charts.
It's a lot to master, and a lot of constraints in building your business. But now that you guys have had a lot of success and are up and running, do you ever feel like the regulatory constraints that were probably a challenge for you as you were building are now a positive in terms of barriers to entry?
Yeah, I mean, in startup land, hard is good, right? Hard is barriers to entry. And, for all the incumbents in the space, I mean, it's awesome that there are all these regulations, right? Because it prevents a lot of startups from getting into the game. Because the complexity is high, the specific skill set across these categories is limited out there, and you just need more money to raise to be able to do it. Once you've done it, not a lot of other guys getting into the space trying to do what we're doing.
You're too far ahead. Yeah. Great. Same question for you, Annie.
Yeah, sure. So, I think similar to your business, Michael, we deal with HIPAA, which is intended to protect the sharing of information about patient records. And the other area that we deal with is actually Stark law. And I'll talk more about Stark because I think you covered HIPAA, and there's probably a lot more that your business will deal with in that regard than ours. So just a show of hands, raise your hand if you're a doctor. No doctors in here. Okay, good. Raise your hand if you think the doctor is employed by the hospital or gets paid by the hospital. Some people do. Okay. So the reality is doctors primarily get paid by payers separate from the hospital. And that split in kind of the way our healthcare system works is the reason why, one of the reasons why our healthcare system is really broken. You have doctors who get to really use hospitals as hotel rooms, so that the OR is something that they rent out, essentially, more or less. They go do surgery. The hospital is the one covering the bill for a lot of the things that the doctor uses in the OR. One of the areas that we're focused on is medical devices. Medical devices are the second largest cost category for hospitals and one of the fastest growing ones. But when you understand the dynamic that the doctor was really kind of renting the place and the hospital is the one paying for it, you realize why hospitals are paying a lot of money for this stuff. The doctor gets to choose what he or she wants to use, the hospital pays for it. Now, you want to bring together and kind of realign incentives here. So you might say, hey doctor, if you actually use something that is clinically prudent to use and also going to save the hospital money, we want to give you a payment for that. We want you to share in the savings. Well, good luck, because there you would actually violate Stark Law. So there are certain advancements that are being made or innovations that are being made that are allowing hospitals to undertake some of these programs, but still that is the environment that we're operating in. And so we deal with Stark in a variety of different ways. Another example is we count on practicing physicians to give us advice that we end up using to produce research that then hospitals benefit from. Well, our physicians are employed or work in these hospitals. They're credentialed in these hospitals. And so anytime we work with a hospital, oftentimes we have to make disclosures about who these physician advisors are. And so we're trying to do what's right? Like you want to have practicing physicians opining on this, on the research, because they're the ones who are in the ORs and using the products. But immediately you expose yourself to risk and liability. So that's kind of an example of how we deal with it. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. And can you also just talk about a little bit again about surprises and things that you weren't expecting, and also how you view sort of this competitive edge that Mike talked about?
Yeah, so one of the surprises also kind of involving Stark is Stark touches on the regulation isn't just about doctors who are investors in your company, but it is any indirect family member as well. And that expands all the way to like grandparents.
Really?
Right? So what's like shocking is some hospitals are very risk averse and they've been burned before, they've had to pay penalties to the government.
Probably have to be, right?
Yeah, so they end up saying, well, we want to know anybody who is an owner in Procured Health, and we have a lot of owners because we have a lot of angel investors, are any of their relatives, working in this hospital? Mm-hmm. So that was a surprise. I had no idea that it would be so encompassing, and
that
obviously
is surprising.
So frustrating.
I would have expected that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, does that exist in any other industry? Like, I've never heard that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe that's a question for you.
Yeah, it's a surprise to me too. So let me get back to you all.
Yeah, there's a good rationale for Stark. I mean, there's a good reason for it but there's many different, implications of it that you don't immediately think about. Because if you're saying, okay, well, I'm not directly going to be paying the doctor something, so that should be okay. And they're like, no, because they still might take their volume to this hospital and take patients there because there's some sort of side benefit.
And you don't know how it's going to be interpreted, so you have to err on the side of caution.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So I guess I'm the only one on this panel that's financial services, and I have been told that one of the only other industries that is perhaps more regulated than financial services is healthcare. So this is actually very therapeutic for me. So I really appreciate this.
So you're feeling lucky, right?
I'm feeling great here, actually, because I'm usually the one who's complaining about regulation when I'm talking to a lot of other tech startups. But obviously similar to you guys, we also deal with federal regulation. So we deal with Dodd-Frank and the CFPB and rules coming out of that. And obviously there's a lot of uncertainty right now with what's going to happen with Dodd-Frank and the CFPB. But then we also have to deal with state regulations. So every state obviously has their own set of rules for how to originate a mortgage. What legal disclosures are required to be sent to the borrowers. different advertising rules.
Are there any states that are particularly difficult to work in?
Well, I don't have a lot of experience, with all the particularities of each state, but New York always seems to be one that is very difficult to work with.
So before you enter into a new state, you have
right.
to do a ton of research and make sure that the regulatory regime doesn't shift.
Yeah, well, I mean, so we license the platform to the lenders, right? So, we just go wherever the lenders are
Yep.
originating. And a lot of times we do end up, kind of working together with the lenders to figure out, how we're going to comply with all the regulations. Usually before we go live with our platform, especially if we're dealing with a larger lender, they're going to have a compliance team or at least a compliance person that has to check everything off, before we actually do go live. Because our platform obviously is, we're going directly to the lenders, but they're using it with their borrowers, right? So it has a lot of different implications in terms
Yep.
of, when different things have to happen. So it really has, kind of forced us to, from a technology standpoint, to really architect a system that is very flexible and can be adapted to a lot of different scenarios. The other piece of this, and actually getting to your point about surprises perhaps, is that every lender also has a different interpretation of these regulations, right? So, we're not lawyers to those lenders. We're providing a technology platform, so we're not going to get into an argument about, who's right and how how the regulation needs to be interpreted. So again, it has a lot of implications on our end from how we structure the platform. But just to go on that point, I will say that when I started Mortgage Hippo, I did know that the mortgage industry was highly regulated, but I didn't know exactly what to expect.
Right.
And I definitely have a love-hate relationship with regulation because I have to deal with it obviously from a lot of different perspectives. But at the same time, when you think about everything that's happening in the financial services industry and in the mortgage industry, why are so many lenders actually looking to technology? A big part of that is because regulation is actually eating away at their profits, so they're looking to use technology like ours to automate and standardize different parts of the processes, right?
And make it simpler for the end user.
Right. Yeah. Right. So it definitely, I would definitely say that it has helped us a lot in terms of this push that we're seeing in the mortgage industry towards digitization of the entire process.
So I just have to share with everyone, Val is one of my former terrific students from law school, and it's so much fun to have him on this panel now. And you started this business pretty soon after you finished school. So can you talk a little bit about how much regulatory experience you had, what that was, or was it really a sort of learn-on-the-job experience?
Very little regulatory experience, to be honest with you. It's one of those things where, I'm always a little bit cautious because I am a lawyer myself, not to, kind of getting to the questions about, lawyers and how to use lawyers, but I always have to be a little bit cautious of not being too arrogant to think that I can actually, do it myself. Lawyers are not experts in every aspect of the law, so we also have to rely on subject matter experts, to help us out. So
great. And it looked like you wanted.
No, I was just going to say. I mean, there's a reason why lawyers exist and why firms are good businesses, because there's no way that as leaders in business we're going to keep up with all of this stuff and understand it in the level of detail. I can tell you. So I went to law school. And my two co-founders did not, and they're always like, well, we don't need to be thinking about that. I was like, no, like I'm good enough just to issue spot and know that there's going to be a problem and know that there's going to be a risk, but then we have to spend money on lawyers. And I made Chris from our finance department come and listen to me speak, but he can tell you we're always kind of blowing budget on what our legal costs are.
So am I the only non-lawyer up here? Is this like, I didn't know this is the lawyer panel.
We're not judging you, though.
Yeah. All right.
So do you
A little.
do you take on a lot of kind of like
No,
legal?
I don't feel comfortable doing anything myself on kind of this stuff. It's too risky to.
Well, this conversation is a great segue into something I wanted to ask all of you, how you use your outside counsel, and how do you evaluate the value that your lawyers add? How often do you have lawyers get involved in issues? Maybe you might have suggestions for people in the audience of how to best use lawyers. And do any of you have in-house counsel, or are you all working with outside counsel? And maybe speak to some of the differences between, if you have in-house counsel, some of the differences between using, hiring a lawyer from the outside world or finding someone to be on your in-house team.
So we use a ton of different lawyers, and just by the nature of the business, the best in the country or the best in the state, doesn't necessarily help you in all the other states that you want to do business in, let alone the other countries you need to do business in. And because we straddle, health tech and fintech and, healthcare regulation, health information regulation, as well as financial regulation, it's rare that I find a firm, even in a state, that can help with all of it. So we end up spending a lot, like I said. We are not at the point where we have internal counsel, although it is insane that we don't. We're trying to fix that right now, just by virtue of...
Call me if you need someone. We have a lot of great law students that I can recommend.
I will call you. So, yeah, listen, what I've seen in the past is, once you get to a certain revenue stage, it makes sense to have your own counsel because you end up just bleeding all sorts of money. And I never look at any of these bills personally. Maybe I should be, but having internal counsel that can make at least commercial decisions and knows enough the extent of risk or liability that we're willing to take so that they can decide at the moment when to go outside. It makes a ton of sense. We're certainly past our A and approaching our B round. We should have external or internal counsel, at the very least, just to manage it all, because there's a ton.
Makes a lot of sense. And to someone who really is sort of in the trenches with you, understanding your business and maybe able to help manage some of the lawyers that you hire.
And one of the things that I think we'll probably talk about is a lot of these regulations are a bit of a moving target. In almost every jurisdiction that we're in today, the local regulator, and pick your flavor of which regulator, has some kind of entrepreneurship innovation sandbox that they're putting together where you can come in or you can register and you can try stuff without getting hammered because you just didn't know everything, or you missed some aspect of the regulation, and you can kind of push back and give advice. Like we're getting called on by most governments and local representatives on both sides of the aisle to say, hey, what would you do to change this? To support companies like you that are creating jobs and are changing the game. So we find that actually is something you end up spending time on as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Great. Annie?
We use external counsel. I think we're still too small to require an in-house type of role. But it's also because the variety of legal questions we have are there's a lot of variation. So we have obviously customer agreements, but then we get into things like information security, we get into labor, you get into when you're raising capital. And so it's really, we won't find an inside counsel person who can do it all. They would at some point just be managing external counsel and maybe taking some of the easy stuff off the plate. But I would say, when you're looking at counsel, I think I would say be upfront around what you're able to do and what you can afford, and really kind of make them be accountable to you to be cost effective.
Right.
And sometimes you'll ask a very basic question to lawyers and they'll give you a 3-page response. And there's nothing more frustrating than that, because you're like, I didn't need the 3-page response. I really just needed to know, can I do this? Can I not do this?
Well, that's a great point. Finding a lawyer that you feel like you're really communicating with and that's a good fit, so that really understands what your needs are. So when you need the 3-page answer, which sometimes you absolutely do, especially in these industries, your lawyer's there and able to give you that more sophisticated answer. And when you want a short, quick yes or no, your lawyer knows you and knows your business and knows that this is the right point to give you a short, quick answer and can be really helpful. So having the right fit, I think, is an excellent point.
I think just a simple pro tip is to set a budget.
Set a budget.
Right? There's no question that you can ask that can't turn into an unlimited 300-page answer. It could be anywhere in between. Right. Set a budget.
And you know what, another awesome point, sometimes people are in every area of life. It's uncomfortable to talk about money sometimes, and people don't have that conversation up front with their lawyers of, this is how much I want to spend on this particular issue. So there's just a miscommunication, and having that upfront conversation of, this issue is worth $10,000 to me. This is how much I want to spend on the answer. You're being much more helpful to your lawyer too, because that's communicating to your lawyer how much time he or she should spend on researching and getting you the answer. So I think that's an awesome point. Have those slightly uncomfortable conversations about where you are in your business and what you can afford and what these particular legal issues are worth to you to have someone investigate.
Well, no, I was just going to add that also from my perspective and my experience also, perhaps, equally or more important than the length of the answer is really the clarity of the answer.
Clarity, yep.
I've worked with lawyers who just do not have the ability to explain something and dumb it down for me. And again, this is where, me being a lawyer, I have to be, just check my ego at the door and just say, look, I don't understand what you're saying. And I've definitely worked with lawyers that just cannot dumb it down, and I think that's incredibly important, for every professional in a technical field, to be able to help me understand the risks,
right,
so that we can make an informed decision. So,
right,
it seems like a pretty simple skill, but I do think that a lot of people don't, are not quite there yet.
Yeah, you guys are all making awesome points about finding a lawyer who's the right fit for whatever it is. Someone who you communicate well with, you understand what they're saying, you're comfortable calling, you feel like the bills are fair, but spending time, meeting different attorneys and finding an attorney that not only has the right skill set, but might have the right personality, the right communication skills, that's comfortable for you, you're going to be more likely to bring that lawyer in when you have problems early on, and they can be fixed, as opposed to maybe avoiding conversations and letting them turn into bigger problems down the road. Is that fair?
Yeah, I was just going to also add, check your lawyer's work. So, don't expect that they're always going to get it right, especially if it involves numbers. So if you're doing any sort of financing and you're looking at cap tables and stuff like that, they always
check the cap table.
Yeah, they always get it.
The words to live by, always check your cap table. Great. So moving, away from lawyers for a minute, I think we all know the importance of building the right team. Coming up with it, you guys all have like extremely innovative ideas in very complex industries that are solving really important problems, but executing is probably even more important than coming up with the idea or figuring out what problem you want to solve. And Mike, I know you in particular, and hopefully you can both also jump in, have spent a lot of time creating a team that's both innovative, because you need a cutting edge, innovative, creative thinking team that's willing to take risks and help you build this business, but that's also able to handle a pretty complicated regulatory regime. So can you talk a little bit about how you built that team and still maintained the culture that you intended for your company?
So building a startup to me is a lot like creating a hit movie, right? You kind of start with this script or an idea. You eventually, flesh out that screenplay, get to your product market fit, if you will, put it together, put it out. And in the movie industry, like with any tech sector, you're kind of either a hit or nothing. There is really no number 5 or number 6th place at the box office. Who cares? You failed. And what happens in those hit movies, right? You kind of want to do it again. If you have a hit movie, you want to do it again with the same group of people. So on the innovation front and the culture of building a great company, I've had the pleasure of just kind of going from sector to sector or company to company with that same group of innovative people. But in each one of these new categories, you kind of need to find the level of expertise and the talent, the leadership that is the guy or woman that just totally understands it and can help you build out the company in that particular sector, while not crushing your culture, right? Culture, I always say culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, to play up on Peter Drucker's quote. So I've seen it, and I've actually lived through it, where you bring in somebody that not only is the industry expert and knows the regulation and knows how to navigate, but that just is a culture killer. So it was a very important find in this particular company with League to find somebody that has been an industry veteran, and in our case, a veteran with Blue Cross Blue Shield group of companies for over a decade, but has crossed over to startup land and was a president of a company called WellTalk, later stage health tech company that would fit with our culture, understand how to innovate in the category that is notorious for like not innovating, and just fit into how, not necessarily the what or the why, but figure out how to fit in to the how we do things, and how, or your values and culture, is really how you compete, which if you're not really focused on doing, you're kind of dead man walking, and you don't know it yet.
And I'm sure it's easier to look at someone's resume or talk to them about their past job experience and determine whether they're going to be a right fit for sort of structuring the regulatory issues that you need to deal with. How hard is it to meet someone in an interview or read about them on their resume and figure out if they're going to be the right culture fit?
Yeah, so for me, the CV is generally useless in that, I know when I'm bringing on somebody, at an executive level that's an industry expert, I know that his or her job with me is going to change like 30 times between day one and day whatever, and so what I care more about is do we line up on our values? And in my case, with every company, I started like literally day one is what are the mission? What is the mission? Who's our customer and what value we're going to bring? And then what are our values? Meaning, how are we going to do this? With League, it's kind of hard to be in the healthcare industry and wanting to redefine it, where you're empowering people with their own health, if you hire a whole bunch of people that don't care about their health. So health is my priority. Excellence, because we're all about the experience. So I look for people that have shown evidence of displaying those values, not what companies or what jobs they've had in particular. And to me, that is a more important test, because the skills and the job specifically is going to change a lot.
That makes a lot of sense. That's a good way to view it. Hanny, Val, either of you want to add anything to that?
No, I think I covered it really well.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I mean,
Okay,
I
great.
completely agree with the last piece, especially what you said.
That's
Great.
code for he just talked way too much, and we should just get on with it.
You were comprehensive. We love that. Hanny, you have obviously a business that has lots of risks that you're constantly trying to minimize. What strategies have you used and that you think are effective in minimizing risk in such a heavily regulated industry?
Look, so unlike Michael, this was my first startup. And so I knew that I couldn't go out. It wouldn't be easy for me to go out on day one and raise a ton of capital in a seed round. The seed round we raised was $1.1 million. Really eked it out by the skin of my teeth. It was not like easy money pouring in. And so we knew that the way we were going to build traction was to figure out a product that didn't require us to sit in the IT queue at hospitals. And to avoid that, it means you got to avoid touching protected health information, patient data. To avoid that, it meant avoiding having to actually integrate into healthcare IT systems. And so we were able to create a standalone product that addressed a specific problem, and got us into, about 60 health systems, 500 or so hospitals, without having to worry about HIPAA and all these things, right? So we were able to take, I think, a much more measured approach. Mm-hmm. I would say the other area that we've really, and I would encourage anybody who's thinking about healthcare IT, I know there's big problems to be solved with PHI, but think about the number of problems you can solve that actually don't require that, and maybe you can evolve into. So actually now we're going through the process of becoming HIPAA compliant so we can do more. But the other thing I would say is, we are in a B2B marketplace. We sell to hospitals, and there's a lot of risk mitigation you can do in contracts. And so what I would say is, don't take at face value what the hospital asks you to sign, that there's actually a lot of back and forth. So if you feel like you're being pushed to sign something, what I've learned over time is actually there's probably a lot less risky language you could put in and still be able to meet their needs.
So drafting contracts, being strategic, minimizing
Absolutely.
Risk through.
Yeah, I think just knowing that, because when you're starting a company, you feel like you have to say yes to everything. Mm-hmm. And when lawyers at a big healthcare system come to you and say, hey, this is our contract, this is the way we do things, this is the way we've always done things, that is never a good reason for why you have to sign something.
because it might not be a good fit for your business. So it might be a contract that would work for something else, but with you know your risks, you know where you need to minimize your risks, so being strategic about negotiating those agreements.
Yeah, and look, lawyers have a role to play in hospitals, but the business side will drive the lawyers to behave in a certain way. So if someone in the business says, yeah, we really need this to solve a big problem, they'll find ways to work with you.
And being strategic, if you tried to negotiate every single point, you're going to lose some credibility. If you pick the points that
Absolutely.
are the most important to you, maybe you can get those points negotiated in a way that minimizes.
One thing I wish I would have done in law school is take a negotiation class. And so I'd say that's another tip, like, because a lot of this stuff is sorted out for us in face-to-face negotiations. You know, read books like Getting Past No and all that kind of stuff. And
I don't teach negotiation, so I did not pay him to say that. Okay, great. So we've spent a lot of time talking about how regulated these industries are and the specific regulations that each of you need to deal with in building your businesses. You talked about it a little bit, Mike, but these regulations are fluid, right? So where they are right now, it may not be and probably won't be where they are tomorrow, in 5 years, in 10 years. And as you're planning your businesses, you not only have to deal with the regulatory regime as it is today, you have to be anticipating where these regulations may go, are likely to go, might go. That's a huge challenge as you're mapping out the future course for your companies. And I would love it if you could just talk a little bit about that and whether you think the regulations that you mentioned earlier in this conversation are likely to get more restrictive, if you think they're going to loosen up, and maybe even if you have some ideas on what the factors are that are going to come into play to impact this.
So I think in our case, it is completely a moving target. I mean, this morning there was big news on the healthcare regulation front from the floor of the Senate. It's going to continue to be a moving target, and I think that's true across the different regulations that we deal with, and it's true across countries, right? This is something that it's a major cost for the country. I mean, it's almost 1/5 of the GDP, and a lot of these regulations and a lot of the laws are just moving or rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, right? Because the real problem is people are, using more of the healthcare system. We've got the boomers hitting the system. It's getting more expensive, and this is true in every Western country and a lot of non-Western countries. So staying on top of it is pretty key. But I think the other, and maybe I wouldn't have known this or I wouldn't have thought this kind of in my first startup. I would just kind of assume that this is the way it is, and I kind of got to play by these rules. A lot of these rules were designed for what the business was,
Right.
and what the issues used to be. And
Hard to keep up with the changing rules.
don't anticipate, what the issues are going to be.
Absolutely.
And where to quote Wayne Gretzky, as a Canadian, where the puck is going. And so what I said earlier about just getting to know who these lawmakers are, and not only the lawmakers, but the guys that influence the lawmakers, kind of the policy people, to help educate them. Because most of them don't get it. Most of them don't understand how the changing, kind of changing landscape, how technology can change the economics, how a new generation of consumers that are, about to dominate the workforce, how they want to use these products and these experiences. Most of the policymakers don't get it. They're just learning. So you have to go in not as the young, I'm kind of scared of my shadow, I don't really understand all this, non-lawyer, to actually be a little bit more bold and kind of help paint the picture and get these people on your side. And I think it's a long-term investment.
Yep.
So I know a lot of startups that are, just living hand to mouth and looking for their next round. It's hard to think that way, but if you don't think about the long term, you'll never be there to see it.
So making some of your responsibilities not only building your business, but educating the people who are making the policies and making the changes to the regulations so that the regulations going forward actually make sense and work for the businesses.
Yeah, and what you'll find, and this is just another a learning that I've had, is in changing where the regulation, what the regulation says, and how policymakers think about it, you'll always find another big brother or big sister that is interested in helping you out, that maybe is not from healthcare, but is from banking, or that is from some other giant industry where there's economic incentive or other incentive for them to participate, because it always helps having
Yep.
one of those parties at your back.
That's great. And we're almost out of time, but Hanny, Val, any last words that you want to add to that? Would be terrific.
The last thing I'd say is, the evolution in the regulatory landscape, for us, it does one thing, and that is sometimes it stalls decision making, because we sell to hospitals, hospital CEOs, CFOs. They might just say, you know what, I need to wait and see how things shake out, and that is the challenge that I don't think you would immediately think about, with these things. So.
Makes a lot of sense.
I'll just say that our first advisory board member is a very well-known lawyer and lobbyist in DC. So, he's been very helpful, obviously, at keeping track of everything that the folks over in DC are doing. So,
yeah, those are good friends to have. Okay, well, that was awesome. Thank you so much, and please join me in thanking our terrific panelists for this great conversation.